This is one of the most difficult and critical topics that we ever can cover. And one of the reasons we wanted to ask you to fill out that poll is in a moment we'll know the results, is it will inform Andy and me about how many of our, about how we want to shape this session. I'll just tell you now what we have in mind. And then while you're filling out the poll, we'll check the results in just a moment, and then we'll go from there. We wanted to, cash is everything, right? You've heard me say this on any of our webinars in the past. Certainly those who've been to the HEI know what an emphasis we put on it. You can live without a lot of things, but you can't live without cash. And of course, nowadays, with the difficulties in financing, managing, being the controller of your fate or your destiny is, i.e. your cash, is probably more critical than it's ever been. So what we want to do is share some thoughts with you about how we want to make this as practical as possible, about some ideas for how you might stretch your own cash. We want to be sure that you understand the difference between profit and loss and cash. And then we have a little tool that we're going to be able to share. Okay, so Jess just put up the results. Clearly, we have very little overlap here with folks who've seen this in the past. So we've got a plan. We'll run right through it. Like I say, we're going to start with some anecdotes. Andy's going to walk you through making sure you really understand, like I said a second ago, the difference between profit and loss and cash flow, and how to avoid mistakes in forecasting. I'm going to then give you a handy tool that you can use, that I use with all my investments and any business that I've ever been involved with. And then we're going to do something that I think is very timely, given the challenges that you're all facing out there. We're going to share a really cool tool that Andy has crafted that will let us offer some ideas, some pragmatic ideas for how you can preserve your cash, how you can drive more readily and more quickly to profitability. And then again, we're going to open this up to Q&A. As Jess said before, if you can please use the Q&A, Andy and I are going to keep an eye on it. And that's how we will sort of shape our comments in the time that follows here. So I'm going to hold off from introducing Andy for just another couple of minutes to make a few other introductory comments. Let me again just underscore, if you have not already heard it, get the How I Built This episode for the Stonyfield story, where you will hear, I think it's an hour and a half, but you'll hear a solid start to finish summary of every conceivable mistake that I think you can make, but maybe you'll all prove me wrong, when it comes to cash management. I will tell you that Samuel and I, when we started, Samuel was a fantastic yogurt maker and engineer. He could make stuff happen with machinery that literally was magical. When he left the plant is when everything went wrong. When he returned, everything kept going. I was pretty good at fundraising, better at people management, and quite good at marketing. But as you'll notice, neither of us had a finance background. Even though we'd both run organizations, we depended historically on our own financial people. And therein lies the heart of my long learning curve that, again, you'll hear about in the How I Built This episode. Now, I want to get right into the heart of the program. So I'm just going to tell you that in a period, a particularly dark period in our history, where, being entrepreneurs, meaning what I call pathological optimists, we made the classic mistake that you will hear us talk about today, and you really need to take it in, which is if you're an entrepreneur, that is, if you're somebody who has launched something or is leading something, particularly a startup, then by definition, you're optimistic. And the problem with optimism when it comes to cash flow is you tend to overestimate when the money's going to come in from sales or investment, and you tend to underestimate when and how fast it's going to go out. And again, that was the story of our 9 years. You're going to hear a lot of practical ideas here, but I will just quickly mention just a couple to give you a little bit of a feel for the art form known as cash management. For starters, we, of course, were launching a organic yogurt company at a time when very few Americans were eating yogurt and nobody knew what organic was. So therefore, the problem that I've often described as the absence of supply or demand. And that also meant the absence of investors, and particularly institutional investors, similar to now. There was just an abject shortage. In fact, there weren't any. And so we had to come up with innovative ways of raising capital. We ended up raising from 297 individuals, literally not the way you want to do it, but it was just kind of a constant rolling offering. We also found ourselves often relying on suppliers, working out innovative arrangements. We did the same thing with customers. We did the same thing with landlords. And I'm mentioning all of this because the general theme that I always reference in the HEI is if you don't ask, you don't get. And cash flow and raising capital and managing your cash is the sort of where the rubber hits the road on that logo, on that motto. For example, during a very dark period, our fruit supplier had cut us off because we weren't keeping them going. And they actually, the story's a little darker than I have time to make it right now, other than to say that our co-packer had gone Chapter 7 and our fruit supplier lost a lot of money on them. And then they kept sending me fruit until they realized that they weren't going to get the money back from that bankrupt co-packer. So I sat down with them and I said, listen, the bad news is I can't pay you what you've already advanced me. I said, but the good news is I'm going to use about $250,000 of your fruit if you keep supplying me for the next 6 months. So I said, let me make a deal with you. If you'll advance me another, they had already advanced me about a month's worth. If you'll advance me another 5 months worth of fruit, charge me interest, we'll turn it into a loan, I'll pay it back to you over 2 years. I will promise not to purchase fruit from any other supplier until you're fully paid out. And I will secure your loan with our equity, which is, by the way, a bit of chutzpah on my part, because as I like to say, our equity was actually more of a liability than an asset. Anyhow, they did that deal. Remarkably, 2 years later, we had paid them out. And now today, 41 years later, they are still our fruit supplier. They have literally sold us billions of dollars. An example of if you don't ask, you don't get. It was amazing. They said it, they went with us, but it was the asking that made it happen. Similarly, you can, if you have a co-packer or a producer, a supplier, they can be more efficient if they do longer runs. So you could ask them, produce a longer run to get you more efficient. You'll probably need to put a personal guarantee and guarantee that you'll buy out that run by some amount of time. But ask them if they will release and invoice you only on what's released. So it's efficient for them and more profitable for them and more efficient on cash for you. Our landlord, we actually at one point gave him equity in our business instead of our ability to pay rent, and that ultimately worked out very well for him. We have customers who banked us through this period. We would guarantee them a promotional rate, sell them at an everyday low price rate in order to both get steady orders at a pace that we could keep up with, and also to get them to agree to pay us in an expedited fashion, and so on and so forth. We've had shareholders guarantee our bank loans. We've had shareholders guarantee our bank loans so that the bank only charges interest for periods. So you get the general idea. I'm just trying to condition the conversation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andy. I don't think Andy needs much of an introduction. Loft Growth Partners has been a critical partner for the HEI forever. And Andy is, of course, a dear friend of mine, a dear friend of HEI, but more importantly, a really generous advisor to folks at various levels of growth, but particularly early stages, such as many of you. So Andy, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Gary. All right, I'm going to share my screen and let me know when it's up.
You're on.
All right. So I'm going to do a little monologue here that's very brief called Cash is King. And if we were all in person, I would make a really bad joke. How can I be out of cash? I still have checks. And there's always somebody in the front row says, right, how can you be out of money? You still have checks. And that's where I sort of hold my head. So I spent time, and you'll have copies of these materials, so I'm going to go quickly. I spent the formative part of my career on the operating side in the food business and had this crazy idea that somebody needed to help emerging brands with industry help and capital. And I'm now 23 years into that. And one of the big mantras is, businesses generally don't go out of business because they're stupid ideas. They go out of business because they run out of cash. So what I'm going to do is talk to you about P&Ls are nice, but cash is what matters. So the first question that I want to make sure we talk about is, well, what's the difference? You need P&Ls for your accountants. You need them to help formulate your taxes, but you can't pay bills with a piece of paper. You need some cash. So this is a business that I didn't try and create it to look anyway, but would you be interested in having a business with $3 million of revenue in the first year and $14 million of revenue in the second year, and it makes $750,000 in the second year? Most people would say, yeah, that's kind of interesting. But please don't look at things annually. So now if I break it out monthly, here's the same first year. And my only inquiry would be, please don't look at your P&Ls because it's cash that matters. So what I'm going to do is convert this to cash. And again, I didn't try and make it look anyway. I spent 5 minutes, converted some things. You probably have some cash discounts. You probably, unfortunately, have a bad debt every now and then. Importantly, there's probably a return somewhere. And the biggest of which is those pesky trade discounts, especially in CPG land. So, you just gave up, I don't know, $400,000 or whatever it is of revenue when you go from revenue to cash. But more importantly, you don't get it when you invoice. And if you do, I want to know who you are because I'd like to learn from you. Sure, you get credit card on your website, but the majority of us have a 30-60. If you're dealing with Walgreens or CVS, it could be a 180-day payment cycle. Well, now your revenue on your P&L of 3.2 million is really 1.9 million of cash. Now that's a huge difference. And if you go through cost of goods sold and you do the same thing, your P&L, you match your revenues to your expenses, but it doesn't work that way in real life. You got lumpy payments. If you have a co-packer, you can't run 7 cases. You got to run some amount. So you got these lumpy payments. Same with your team. It's not nice and smooth. And unfortunately, it doesn't correlate to revenue because you probably have some team and other expenses before you get to having revenue. So some of these predate your marketing, same thing. Maybe there's a trade show that you book and you pay for that 6 months or a year before it actually happens. Your general administrative things like insurance, rent, whatever, that stuff all comes before you got some sales. So it's not some nice, smooth X% of revenue. And the cash impact, again, a couple $100,000 here is not massive in the scope of a $7 million or $10 million business. But if you don't plan for it, you're out of business. So if you look at the summary, if you were planning for $163,000 hole in your first year, and it really turns out to be $2.25 million, you are just SOL and out of business. If you had looked at your cash, you'd understand how much more you're going to need. And Gary is going to do a sort of practical week by week exercise. So the only two things you really need to know is it takes longer than you think, and it costs a lot more than you think. So you can brainstorm emerging brands, plan this mostly on a weekly basis, but or at least on a monthly. Don't do it annually. That's not worth the time. So with that said, a couple quick notes: conserving cash. This was originally developed for COVID, but the principles apply nonetheless. It's really about living to thrive another day when cash is tight. So, and all this is available for download at loftgrowthpartners.com. Everything that one day was fixed is now variable. Again, if you ask, it's up for discussion. You have to assume that they're not going to be surprised that you're asking. They may say no, but if you ask appropriately, they're not going to be overly pissed off. I am flabbergasted what people will agree to when you ask. There are tons of resources on the Loft site. And now I'm going to turn it over to Gary, who's going to go through a great tool, and then I'm going to come back and do an interactive session with you. Gary?
And again, thanks, Andy. And again, I just want to remind folks, use the Q&A. We'll get to those questions. Very important what Andy just referenced that I want to just underscore. Remember, retail, you're not the only one who's hurting, right? Retailers are hurting. Suppliers are hurting. Banks are sometimes or often these days hurting. So this is why what Andy just said, and why my suggestion about if you don't ask, you don't get. It's why, this is the opportunity. And if, the legendary story of this was Ben and Jerry's. Ben and Jerry went to 21 banks before one finally said yes. And it was a bank called Marine Midland in, I think, Buffalo. 21st Bank. But the deal they got was the difference between being in business and not. And it was all, again, this sort of absolutely persistent focus on, shameless asking. And it's what we all have to do. So what I want to do now is share my screen. Of course, I don't want to share that. Sorry. Here we go. Andy, are you all able to see this?
Yeah, we're seeing your web browser.
You're not seeing the spreadsheet.
Not yet.
Okay. All right. That's not good. Hold on. What did I do wrong? Stop share. Forgive me. Otherwise, Carlene or Jess, I may have you put this up since I'm proving to be inept here. Okay. Let me stop my sharing since I don't know what went wrong just now.
You want me to share it, Gary?
Yeah, if you can share it, Andy, that would be great. And then the question is, am I able to use it? No, I'm not. If you're sharing, I'll let you. I'll let you do toggling. Yeah. All right. Why don't you make it full screen, Andy? Bring it all the way up if you can. Okay. All right. Carlene and Jess earlier gave you all a link to this, what I call indispensable cash flow worksheet. And what it is it's a tool. I just gave you a little anecdote here a second ago about the very dark period that I went through in my early learning curve, we'll call it. And what happened was I alluded to a co-packer who went bankrupt. That proved to be a near fatal experience for us. As I said, many of our suppliers also took a hit during this. And the net result was that we wound up burning I'm sparing you the gory details, other than to tell you that we wound up burning at a sales rate of around $2.5 million annualized. We wound up burning about $25,000 every week. And this went on for pretty much about a year and a quarter. Now, if you do the math, you'll quickly figure out that that was, $1.5 million of burn. And we were fighting just to stay alive. And so in this period, I learned the hard lessons that we're going to sort of summarize for you. I learned them the hard way by creating a tool that required that I knew not my monthly or quarterly or weekly cash flow, but my daily cash flow. I needed to know what I needed to have come in the next 24 hours in order to meet payroll, in order to ship, in order to get things out there. On a Wednesday night, the night before payroll, on a Thursday, I knew the next day I was going to have a $7,500 cash hit. And I knew what I had to have in the bank by 9 that morning. And so this sheet that you're looking at, which again is available for free, and go ahead and use it. And Andy, you might widen columns K and L there so it makes sense to people. Thank you. But what this tool does is it allows you to avoid the problem that Andy and I both described, which is, first of all, if you're out of cash, it's too late. So what you're wanting to do is anticipate what you're going to need and when you're going to need it. And so, as I say, I did this every single night. I would go back to the office and plugged in what I knew was going out, let's say, the next 7 days, and therefore what I had to bring in. Now, of course, my sales at a rate cash burn of $25,000 means my sales weren't keeping up with my uses. So that meant I had to do sort of panic fundraising, right? I had to be constantly calling individuals. Thanks, Andy, that's better. And as I say, this was generally literally individuals, friends, family, college mates, my mother-in-law, my mother, anybody who I thought would take my call. Here's how the sheet works. Let's assume we're starting this week in column 1. Now, again, you can change the columns. If you happen to be flush with cash, you can do this on a monthly basis, right? But in this case, I've put it in weekly terms because I assume that most of you or many of you are on a week-to-week cash challenge period. Now, this is assuming a startup on the week of July 15th this week, and it assumes that you were able to inherit, borrow, beg $75,000 in starting capital, wherever, doesn't matter. What you see here is the sources, and as we say in the upper line, if you input in the blue cells, then the black cells will automatically calculate for you. So watch the blue cells. And Andy and I will interact in just a couple of minutes. I'm just going to explain the sheet first. So the top portion that Andy's showing you is the sources of cash. Now, that's not investment sources, because there's a difference between operating flow and overall business, as I'll explain in a second. This is either cash you're getting from your sales or from royalties, or maybe some other kind of income that you're getting, some sort of annuity from a bank account or something. And as you know, when you're just starting out, in this case, the first 2 weeks, there's nothing coming in because you got to make your stuff first. So what you'll see as you go wide on the upper part, the sources, is that we have a business that finally starts to get a little bit of sales in week 3, slowly grows, and eventually gets to $20,000 a week by early November. That will become material shortly. And again, this sheet automatically totals it. In terms of
And
the
reiterate,
uses, and
Gary, sorry to interrupt, reiterate that this is not sales, it's the cash received from your sales.
thank you, thank you. So critical. So when Andy says it takes longer than you think, the fact that you sell something in the week of July 29th most definitely means you're not getting the cash in that week. Also, as Andy quickly covered, but you'll have it in the materials, as you know, the price that you're selling at isn't necessarily what you're receiving in cash. There's discounts, there's trade allowances, there's all kinds of other things that happen to your cash. So the critical point here that we're both trying to make is in this upper section, this is cash, and you've got to be conservative. Do not slap $10,000 in there for the week of August 5th if there's no chance of it happening. The only one who's going to pay the price for that mistake is you and your shareholders. So then we go to uses. Now, again, this assumes a CPG model, which is what I was doing, but you could have a service business. So your uses, these rows here, 17, 18 through 28, can, vary according to your business. But again, in my model, in order for me to start selling, I've got to make stuff. So that first week, out goes about $43,000 of cash, including I got to pay for the equipment or CapEx that I need to make it. So the net cash change, which again will automatically tally for you, shows the cash in, which was 0, versus the cash out, which is 43.5. And that drops you down when you had started with 75K. On the top, that gives you 31,500 at the end of the week, which coincidentally is the beginning of the next week, and so on. And this goes on and on. Now, you can interact with this in lots of ways. For example, Andy, let's just assume that there's a bigger CapEx hit that comes in week of August 5th. Go ahead, slug something in there. Yeah, there we go. And so you see this red ink up on the top, which at its lowest was in the $50,000 range. Now has dropped to about 75K. Now it's 38K. The point here, or 43K. The point is, this is highly interactive, and that's the way you want it. You want to use it as regularly as you can, because you're going to be the best person to inform yourself about your own errors. Now, let me come to the punchline here, and then I'll flip it back to Andy. In whatever is flowing here, let's just look at the static picture here. If you look at the week of September 2nd, you'll see that's the deepest hole. We got down to about $44,000 in the hole. This is after starting with 75K. So, of course, this means we burned, 114. What I want you to understand, again, is if you are in this position and you're discovering it now, it's too late. The point of this exercise is that here on July 15th, you can now see I'm going to have a $44,000 hole by early September before I start to come out of it. Now, in this case, as the sales move up to 14, 15, 18, 20, you can see I'm starting to reduce my burn. I'm starting to make my way out of it. What I'm going to tell you about that number in parentheses, the deepest hole, is whatever that number is, you're going to need twice that amount. Now you're going to say, well, wait a second. What's the point of doing this whole thing so methodically, so rhythmically, so in such detail? If I now am going to be 100% or 50% off, the answer is because you're an optimist. The answer is you're going to miss something. The answer is somewhere in those first slides that Andy showed you is some kind of lesson, some kind of learning, some kind of disaster, some kind of whoops. And this is why what I'm going to tell you is if you are sitting here on July 15th with your 75K and you start producing, right now you are going to need another 85K, 90K, guaranteed. And don't find yourself in mid-August seeing it the cliff getting closer and closer and closer without the source there, okay? So again, the tool's available, it's yours. I don't want to belabor it because I want to get to your questions, but I hope it makes some sense to you. Andy may add some comments here, but my real point is this is a mirror for you. It's a mirror for your optimism. It's a mirror for your realism. Be real, because the one who will pay if you're not is you. Andy? You're muted. Andy, you're muted.
Sorry, the other thing I would add to this is you will be wrong regularly. If you keep track of your errors, hopefully you will learn from them and therefore you'll get better. So one of the things I know Gary and I encourage people to do is copy this over, create yourself a dummy, and then next week you'll play with it and you can look back at the prior week. The other thing you can do is you can look at probably the three most important lines. Cash in, copy that down on the bottom, hard code it, so that you can have it there. Keep an eye on it, learn from it, do the same with your cash out, do the same with your net cash change. Label it as, what I said, 715. And then learn from, what your mistakes are. Because you will make lots of mistakes. We all have. But if you're regularly overestimating your revenue and regularly underestimating your expenses, which, by the way, is likely, and then you dissect it and say, the place where I'm screwing up every week is my payroll. Well, that gives you a place to focus more carefully on. And instead of slapping a number in, maybe you'll take an extra 10 minutes and think about it. So that's the only thing I wanted to add, which is learn from this, keep every version of it so you can go back and look at what you said.
Yeah. And look, I want to just add, and then Spencer has a question that I want to address. Another thing you can do, and that I did to try to learn, is I added columns manually about what actually happened. So between July 15th and July 22nd, I inserted a column, saw what actually happened. And over time, as you see the humbling experience of seeing what actually happened versus what you said, you will learn, because that's the whole point of this thing. Now, Spencer asked, how often did I update the cash flow tool with new numbers? As I just told you, I updated it nightly because I was making so many mistakes. I was so optimistic. I was so unrealistic. Now, I also did lots of things, to make up for my errors. I took checks out into the parking lot in their envelopes, stepped on them a few times, got dirt on the outside of the envelope, put it in my desk, waited till the supplier would call me, and I'd say, you can't believe what happened. It fell out of the mail bag. I would try to bribe employees with yogurt to not cash their paychecks. You do what you have to do. Obviously, you call mom. You do what you have to do. But the most important part of this tool is to learn from it.
Great. With that said, I'm now going to shift to something we haven't done before. So we're experimenting here, which is, so you ask yourself.
Andy,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Forgive me for interrupting, because Spencer had a two-part question. The other part of that is, how long do you keep it going? You asked how frequent to update. You update as frequently as you need it. I am now an investor in companies that are doing hundreds of millions of dollars, and I require of them that they do it now, not just in startup, that they see what's coming, because a big whoops when you're, I see John Rulak and others on this call who have, built some pretty big businesses. They and we will tell you, a whoops when you're talking about 7 figures or 8 figures or 9 figures is can be deadly. So I find this tool is still relevant to me 40 years later. Sorry, Andy.
No, that's right, because we do 13-week rolling cash flows in all our companies as well. So now the question is, so that sounds good, it sounds interesting, but what the heck can I do today? So we're going to try an interactive exercise. Um, we talked about P&Ls and cash. So the question is, how can I get to profitability? Or if you're profitable, how can I increase my profitability? And how can I manage my cash better? And again, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, not the chat. And then we were looking at them across a bunch of parts of your business. Sort of they flow down the P&L, the top of the P&L revenue, the middle of the P&L costs, freight, warehousing, commissions, and then all your OpEx lines. And we asked ourselves, what can we do differently to drive to profitability or increase profitability on those metrics? And what can we do to manage cash better? So, as I often do, most of this group is probably too young to remember a TV show about I wish I was a millionaire, but you used to be able to call a friend, phone a friend. So I reached out to some friends. So here are three entrepreneurs that had 3 or 4 ideas each, and I'm just going to touch on them briefly. Some of these are pretty brutal, and they're self-admitted, ultra low SG&A. Very few people. They all got to be killers. The founder needs to be a doer, not just a thinker, etc. Pursue no more than 1 or 2 channels that are highly scalable. By the way, that's the beginning of a theme on focus. Fewer SKUs. Athletic Greens built a massive business largely on one SKU. Engineer products and packaging to ship efficiently. Those are from Will, a friend at IQ Bar, Jason at New Primal. They fixed a lot of things in an 18-month period, sacrificed some top line growth. They fixed their mix, including Amazon, cut away a whole bunch of SKUs that were either unprofitable or too low with no prospect to get interesting. They did some massive changes on OpEx and headcount, and then slowly added back. And then Matt
Hey,
Majors.
before you go on,
Yeah,
can you go back
sure.
one? Yeah, listen, everybody, please. There are no free lunches out there. There are no free SKUs. There are no free lines. There's so much gold in this particular one here. If there was ever a time for rationalizing and reducing SKUs, this is the one. Just sitting there, they consume cash, right? Packaging, inventory, slots, attention, people time. You got to be ruthless. You got to be willing to take from the bottom and, certainly innovate at the top. But as you bring on new products, really ask yourself, even though it's my mother's, my spouse's, my kid's favorite, garden salad yogurt, which we literally did launch. It's not just ahead of its time. There was never a time for that product. But in any case, you've got to be willing to kill those things. You're going to be grateful that you did. Sorry, Andy, I had to.
No, I think that's right. I have the privilege of being involved in a business that's plus or minus $40 million. It's been profitable every year for 10 years. It's a 10 to 20% grower. It's not a 100% grower, but it's a solid grower. And last year they fired 2 important customers that were about 15% of sales, because as we joke about it, they were both not-for-profit customers. And that's hard to do. And Matt, who's a 3-time successful founder, sold 3 businesses, working on 2 more now. He says, say no to B and C retailers, pull back on OIs, and pull out of slow-moving DCs, because all you're doing is tying up inventory that's going to turn into unsaleables because it doesn't move quick enough. So with that said, then I ask you, what have you thought about? So I'm going to pivot over to my Excel and I'm watching the Q&A. If people have thoughts or ideas, feel free to put them in. We may not be able to capture all of them on the screen, but we can add them later and we'll distribute the tools. So this is what you saw when it was on the screen. And Cindy has a question. When a business is in cash conservation mode, how would you strike a business between spending money on marketing and sales to increase revenue versus not spending anything beyond keeping the lights on? Look, if you're really in the keep the lights on mode, that's your only option. And if you have a few extra pennies, the key is what's going to make the biggest difference in the quickest amount of time.
Yeah, and if I could just compound that answer. So first of all, B and C retailers, Michael, are not your A customers, right? In my day, B and C was bread and circus, so I appreciate the question. But the customers that where your velocities are really not paying the bills, maybe they're not so profitable. You just heard Andy describe a nonprofit customer. Here's the thing. You need to try stuff, but you also have to be brutally
dispassionate,
self-disciplined, dispassionate, and hold a mirror up and know when to cut them. Now, in the case of SKUs, fine, try your new thing that maybe is a lower gross margin than you would like, but it just tastes incredible. Or it's, the consumer reaction's amazing. But, tell yourself, okay, I'm giving it 3 months. I'm giving it 6 months. I'm giving it, a fixed amount of time, and then stick to it. Similarly with this B and C customer thing, you give a customer, you saw the allusion earlier to the wholesalers, to the distributors, give it your all, make it work. You want these things to work out, but have the courage to cut it when it's not, because you're going to be, in the end of the day, like Andy said, it's survivability. Now, on the marketing question that we just took off here, I would say, it's particularly when you are entering a category where you're a newbie and others are already established, you can't afford not to market, right? You have to be willing and able to do something. Have you built enough price in? Can you do a creative, low budget marketing / sampling effort? Can you team up with somebody else who is similarly struggling? Can you share demos together? We did this frequently in the early days of Stonyfield. John Rulak's adding to both of our last comments here. Remember not to wait too long to cut costs. Time is not your friend when it comes to this stuff. The longer you wait, the more you are endangering yourself. So again, dispassionate's one way of saying it. I would say be ruthless.
Yeah. Remember, every dollar you spend today is not around to solve a problem tomorrow. This applies lots of places. If you've got marketing spending that isn't working for you, shut it off. If you've got an employee that isn't performing, it's hard. Be fair to the person, be polite, but you got to separate. If you keep them on 3 months longer than is productive, you lost whatever that 3 months of salary is, and you don't have those dollars to do something else. So thank you, John, for that thought. So what I'm going to do now is, this is what the visual I just showed. What I've done is I've pre-populated the ideas that came from our 3 FONA friends, Matt, Will, and Jason. So I've pre-populated that. And again, we'll get this to you afterwards. People have always asked, well, what else? So with some of our friends and thinking about this over many, many cups of coffee, I added a bunch. So I'm going to share some thoughts. Feel free to add thoughts or questions in the Q&A, but you know, one of the biggest lines on your P&L, hopefully it's in the teens or lower and not in the 20s, is your trade spend. Make sure it's working for you. Track your ROIs. It is hard to do. Also, as you know, some of the distributors and most of the distributors, all the distributors, customers, they've got their hand in your pocket and they will take deductions they're not entitled to. Now, they're not intentionally trying to steal your money. They just, they got some automated things. They think something was agreed to. And, anyway, if you challenge that stuff, money will come back to you like crazy.
Well, the other thing, let's face it, is, they'd rather ask forgiveness later. Like I said, you got to remember, you're not the only one struggling out there.
Yep. One of my favorite things is if you're on this call and you don't know how many colors are on your package, don't pass go, don't collect $200. Find out that answer to the question this afternoon. Because rule of thumb, 4 or 5 colors is fairly normal. 3 if you're on an aluminum can because the quality of the printing is terrible. But some businesses and the designers have 6 colors, 8 colors, 9 colors. And the 6th color could be twice the price of 1 through 5 combined. And the next color 7 could be twice the price of 1 through 6 combined. It gets expensive like crazy. And you can do beautiful packaging in 4 or 5 colors. There's money to be found there. Is your cardboard bulletproof and therefore too expensive? On the other hand, is it too thin and therefore you're paying a ton of money in damages? Think about your packaging.
Another comment I'd make there is there somebody else out there who you can cost share with and buy the same template? And because a lot of times there's the setup costs, for the dies. Can you share that cost with somebody and bring your cash out to half or less?
Right. When you think about cost of goods sold, whether it's raw materials, packaging materials, labor, if you're self-manufacturing or co-packing, think about it holistically. One of the businesses I've been involved with was driving their co-pack costs down and down and down, and that's awesome. But they moved to places where the transportation costs as a result were going up and up and up. So net, it was actually a bad decision because the total cost when you add the 2 lines together was going the wrong direction. Think about it on a total supply chain basis and hold vendors' feet to the fire. Get competing bids where you can. Look, most of us are small customers at the co-packers, and you assume you have no leverage. And that might be very right, but it might not be. One of my businesses is saving 3.5% of revenue by changing one ingredient to another ingredient, and it actually has a preferred taste impact. That was a lucky strike extra. The expectation was savings and parity taste. Price pack.
I'm dealing with a company that will go unnamed that makes a product that they found out, the holy grail was it had to be made a certain way. This is the way the founder created it. They found out that when they put less material in it, the texture was actually better. They actually made it thinner. It crunched better. It yielded better flavor. And so it was just an instant, absolute, accretive to the bottom line, right? Went right to the bottom.
Absolutely. Price pack architecture, if that's not a term you're familiar with, it's I offer 6 ounces for this price or 8 ounces for that price. Getting your price pack architecture right is really important. Spend time on that early on. It helps you to decide, well, I really want to be under a $6 price point. So if I was an ounce less, I could be there. It's hard to change these once you get too much distribution. So get your price pack architecture right. I mean, we all know as consumers, there's been a lot of shrinkflation. Shrinkflation, where they take an ounce out of a box or a pound out of a multi-pound thing. That's all about getting the price pack architecture right. The big companies are really good at that. Most of us are nervous to play around with that. Play around often and early. Think about whether you're shipping, you're paying for shipping, customers are picking up, what your right inventory strategy is. Do you have one pile of inventory in the middle of the country? Do you have three piles of inventory? Because three piles of inventory on the cash side, it doesn't change your P&L profitability, but it ties up a bunch more cash if you have three piles. The benefit to three piles is you're shipping less and your transportation may be better. But think about things holistically. We talked a little bit about marketing spending. You got to be getting something for every penny you're spending. And by the way, this is crazy hard to measure, but spend time on it on your Shopify platform or elsewhere. It's a lot easier to understand ROAS, return on ad spending, than it would be, on the Isles of Smiles program at Publix. A lot of people will say reduce brand marketing to the absolutely essential tactics, eliminate the rest, and then test your way into other things. Stay lean. We've talked about lots of things on the overhead. It is easy to build too much overhead too quickly because of the mentality of, well, we need to have all this headcount to support the growth that's going to come. Great. Some of it you got to add before, salespeople and some other things, because that's what generates. But don't over add. And on the back end stuff, if you think you're going to need 2 ops people and finance people to support the growth, great. When the growth comes, you'll add the people.
Yeah, I was going to say it's easy to add and very hard to get rid of.
It is.
People have a way of sticking around. And again, think I've mentioned this in multiple ways. Are there others? Can you have people who can double spread their effort to help, and therefore you could get some cost savings by charging somebody else, for a field representative, somebody who's out, a merchandiser, a transportation logistics coordinator. Can you I have a investment in a perishable company. They had to ante up and build their own cooler. They lease out some space and they do the shipping, and they charge a fee for handling the logistics. There's another very sizable company, Organic Valley, who actually created a logistics company to do just that. So, when you're making these investments in overhead, are there other ways to leverage them?
Yep. On payroll, look, it's hard. This is not the dot-com era of you pay people $12 and give them a pile of stock. But be careful about overpaying too early on. And if the market price for what you need is one great person, get one great person, not 2 okay people. You'll be much happier. And founders need to lead by example. If they're not taking crazy high salaries and they're more skewed to bonus or something else that's performance based, that permeates the organization. If you're not familiar with PEOs, professional employment organizations, you should be. A lot of cases, they will help process your payroll. Now, you could do that with ADP or some third-party processor, but they can also help with benefits and other things that can save you money or give you more for your valuable dollars. And then just a few freebies at the bottom. Stop selling unprofitable accounts. Focus on channel. Focus. Small companies just can't do everything. I had the privilege for working for one of the smartest people in this industry, and she had 45,000 employees, and she said to me once, "We can do anything," which, it was a big company, you could, "but we can't do everything." And if that was her perspective with 45,000 employees, most of us that have 4 or 8 or 15, certainly need to pick and choose on our priorities, focus on channels, um, select high margin categories, patience. This is actually a really interesting one. A lot of unprofitability comes from trying to grow too fast. We establish our revenue before we really understand our cost, and then we're stuck. We hire people because we think our growth is going to be huge, and the growth materializes, but only at half the rate. And now we're stuck with the head. So don't rush. And there are a lot of really good second tier distributors. And I don't mean that in a second tier quality way, just size wise, local people. The idea of going really deep in 2 markets, ideally 2 contiguous markets, versus some sort of attempt to spread the peanut butter all over the country, is a much preferable idea. And one of our friends, Bob Burke, is a big advocate, as is Elliot Vegan, of something like a Dot Foods that can penetrate alternative accounts and just has a lot of feet on the street. That example happens to be food related. But those are all profitability related. Don't underestimate the importance on the right side here of places where you can think about cash. It doesn't change your P&L, but things like asking, Gary made a reference to it earlier, your packaging supplier, your raw material supplier. Packaging supplier is the best example. I'm going to run 400,000 packages, but I only need 125 this month. I'll take the others over the next X amount of time, and please only ship and bill me as I get them. Now, it's a trade-off because, as most of us know, we change our packaging all the time because we're in constant learning mode. So don't produce too much packaging, because then you can't change your packaging. Whether it's refinancing debt or finding alternatives, if there's a way to have somebody else pay for your hamburger today and you pay on Tuesday, that's always a good option, making reference to Wimpy's and Popeye. So think about how to finance that stuff so your cash is not there. If you have a material D2C business and you're not talking to Shopify Capital or similar, that's a miss, because that's a way to finance your growth on your D2C business. And you can literally talk to them on a Tuesday morning and be financed on Wednesday. What payments can you spread out from annual to quarterly or quarterly to monthly? Insurance, upfront costs at a co-packer. Can you, instead of buying a piece of equipment for 25 grand, can they buy it for you and you pay it back? Your normal tolling charge is 12 cents. Can you pay them 12 and a half cents per unit and pay it back over time? How can you change your terms? Remember, everything that's documented and in your files is negotiable, maybe. I've had cases where companies have paid off their loan for 2/3 or half of the principal. I've had cases where people have taken interest holidays, meaning there's no interest paid for a year, or a principal holiday and they only pay the interest. Or Gary talked about the fruit supplier that they basically paid them over multiple years. So those are some of the examples.
Well, and again, sorry,
Okay.
we have Q&A questions here too. And again, that fruit supplier example was relevant then. It's even more relevant now. Fruit suppliers are looking for, they're challenged also. So, what can you give them that they need? Loyalty, volume. Can you put their name on your package in return for a price? Again, you're limited by your imagination. Just a couple of things, and I'm going to have you also respond to some of these, Andy. Dan Mullen, do need to say, back earlier, had mentioned, if you do have low velocity SKUs, you're doing yourself a favor, because sooner or later the retailers aren't going to hold you there either. So again, save yourself the cash, make that ruthless decision. Now, Adam is asking,
And let me real quickly comment also on Dan's comment. Remember, if the retailer does it to you, they're going to dictate the cost of the exit. If
right,
you plan it, you can dictate the cost of exit. You
well
can
said.
manage it down. You can stop production without them knowing it. So you get to a point where you don't have a large unsaleables or a large inventory you got to write off or something. Keep going, Gary. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and also look, the retailer is going to appreciate you taking the initiative. If you know that it's not going, they're looking at 10,000 SKUs. They're not necessarily as timely or as attentive as you are to yours. And we're going to come around to this in a second in Mark's question. But you can do them a favor, and that might be a little bit of ethical or integrity capital that you're building for the next time you want to introduce something to them. And by the way, we've been talking about this. I got to tell you one about partnering with your customers. One of the most successful things we ever did early on when we were just at loggerheads with a certain retailer on price, we decided to throw in the towel and said, look, what about us just doing your private label? And in the end, it was more profitable with that particular customer than our own branded product would be. There was no trade spend below the line, and it was up to them to manage. And it enabled our more profitable SKUs to still do well. They wanted to have the advantages of a full whole pallet and whole truck shipping, so it was a win-win. So, Mark, let's read his comment. I'm a new global vendor for Whole Foods and snack cheese with 2 SKUs. My distributor in the middle is very slow paying, 90 days actual. The contract is for 30-day payment. Gosh, how many hundreds of thousands of times have I heard that? We did not anticipate this. Whole Foods is now asking for promotions on top of this slow pay, which will increase the bottom line pain of course, the cash pain while trying to grow top line. Is it out of the question to ask Whole Foods to co-invest in promotions? Look, nothing is out of the question to ask. First of all, that's really. I hope you're all taking that answer, that repeated answer back. One thing I would say, and this is easily said, not so easy to do, but Whole Foods is paying a price for that slow paying middle person, and one thing you can do is ask them to help participate in the solution. Hey, Whole Foods, I can give you a little bit more promotion if you can, help your supplier, your distributor, get them to, pay me sooner. You're paying them on time. Can you put in a plug and just say, look, you want to work with me, you want me to grow. Can you put a little bit of pressure on that wholesaler? The thing with dragging, Andy was being very politic. Most distributors are stretching, right? I mean, and let's face it, with fuel cost, inflation, and so on, they again, it hasn't been easy for them either. And it's not like their retailers and customers are necessarily giving them breaks to accommodate the inflation. Although we're getting some improvements in that right now. I cannot stress enough the critical importance of sitting down person to person, drive there if you need, fly there, but try to get with them, go to their tabletop shows, whatever. Look them in the eye and let them know that, look, maybe they can take that kind of time with somebody else, but this is what it's doing to you. Is there something I can do? Now, okay, you may end up paying. I mean, some of these distributors have legislated this, right? They won't divert. They won't buy product from you on excessive on promotion or from others, or they won't, or they'll pay you faster if you enter into a, they have different names. One of them calls it a crossroads program, but is there a contract you can sign? Now you say you've already got one for 30 days, but this is the reality 90. Can you sit down with them? Can you put them on notice? Can you put them on a limited allotment, which will in turn make their customer pissed off at them? Try the personal interaction to the extent possible. Again, hard to do. And do you want to add anything before we go to Michael's?
No, I think the most important thing is the topic about how you promote is different from getting paid sooner.
Right,
You may be
right.
able to leverage one for the other, but you got to fix the first half of your question, Mark. You got to fix that payment cycle. And the accounting people may be doing one thing, and the buying people that you interact with may be completely unaware. So don't be bashful to ask the buying organization at the distributor to talk to their accounting people too. Occasionally that really works, sometimes not.
Yeah. Again, I would just say, look, I know we both know that you're not following the contract. What can I get you to what do you need from me to get back in the terms that I need? How can I help you help me?
Right.
Um, uh, Michael Anderson, I'm an early brand launched into retail in January of 2023. I began with retailers who gave me a chance without knowing who will be profitable or not, and jury is still out. What is the time horizon a new brand should use to evaluate if it's worth continuing on with a retail customer? Such a good question, man. I think I guess I have to say in part, Michael, much depends on your own cash condition. You know, your depending on how dire you are, obviously it can be a whole lot shorter. Um, there was a time when retailers, when I launched, retailers gave us 6 to 9 months to hit velocities. And those days are long gone. And similarly, um, you know, I don't, there was a time when, you could, uh, uh, expect that over time, you'd both get to that win-win situation. But the cash squeeze of these current times means that I think that window is short. I think I think you've got to again be ruthless. This was the comment earlier about the B and C folks. And yeah, sure, you're not going to know. That's why you got to try stuff. But the need to constantly try stuff is all the more reason to be ruthless about the cut. I would also, again, when I do my sort of 8 key lessons, one of the things that I talk about in the fruit supplier I referenced earlier was one of the key cases in my life. Over communicate, let them know. Look, you're not going to be able, unless you get these volumes, you're not going to be able to stay with them, or unless you get, this price, or unless you're paid on time. Let them know. Uh, Give them a chance, but then act on it, right? Don't just have it be words.
Yeah, and be careful. There are certain retailers that are notorious for rotating manufacturers and SKUs like crazy because they want your slotting money and they don't really want your business. Um, Historically, Wakefern is an example of a retailer in the Northeast that their slotting costs are astronomical, and their attention for your products is very short lived. So ask around, whether it's your friends on this call, your friends in the industry. There are a lot of people that understand retailer X is one that's notorious because they have a slotting budget. They're trying to hit a target, and that's all they care about in some examples. Monique then asks, to relative to my spreading the peanut butter too thin across the country comment, what do you do when a retailer essentially wants you to go national? They want to spread it. And the answer is say no. It is really enticing when you get we want to take you national from Whole Foods. Say no, you're not ready. Target, they want to take you national. Say no, you're not ready. Um, Occasionally they'll say go to hell, but generally they'll say, okay, what can we do? How can we work on this together? Um, it is really hard for small businesses to manage a national footprint. even if it's just, the supply chain implications, but it's far broader than that. So this be willing to say no thing is really hard for entrepreneurs. Most of us are pleasers. We want the revenue. We see the stars in our eyes. Learn to say no, unfortunately.
Here,
Uh,
here.
um,
Christina's, oh, by the way, I saw earlier Adam asking, yes, this recording is going to be available. That's why we record once you subscribe, once you've registered, you will have access to this recording. And yes, the spreadsheet, well, the Excel document, the tool that I use, that link is just roll up in the chat. You'll see Carlene attach the link for that if that's the Excel. Oh, I think he's probably referring to yours, Andy.
yeah, well, yeah,
Whoop, just lost your sound. Say it again.
we'll make sure that gets posted as well.
Okay, good, great, great.
Um,
Yeah, so Christina, I don't have you heard of any major retailers or distributors offering earlier pay terms so vendors or brands can get paid sooner? I heard today there may be programs with major retailers where brands get earlier payment terms in collaboration with Citibank. That would be news to me. I will say though, the example that I gave earlier on the private label, that was really a win-win for us. And one of the reasons was we said as a prerequisite to do private label, to hold your own, their inventory, their packaging, they had to pay for our branded and theirs. They had to ratchet down, expedite their terms. So that was a good negotiation that we used for
there,
that. But
there
Andy,
is
do you know?
one. There is one that people should be aware of. It's called C2FO. I'll put the information in the chat. Um, where they have pre-negotiated early payment with Costco, Giant Eagle, Home Depot, and lots of other. I think Kroger's in the pot. Um, so basically, it's sort of a quasi bidding system where you put in your PO information and they can. Don just said the same thing. If you can use the early payment terms there. So I just put that in the chat.
Don
Um,
added an additional comment.
yeah, and Michael says I've used it. They're awesome. Too bad they're not partnered with KeHE. Yeah, that's true. They tend to be more direct. They're not UNFI or KeHE, at least as best I know. But that's a good one that people should know about. Let's see, where else?
Spencer. Spencer's got a question. Are you familiar with Account Now and whether they are just fancy factoring or are they a legit option to help small companies finance large orders from vendors? Don't know them.
I don't know them personally either. Um,
If anyone does, pop a comment in the chat for Spencer.
yeah. Um, So while we're waiting to see what other questions, I would encourage everybody here to form a little share group, preferably non-competing brands and preferably literally in your immediate geography so you can sit down over coffee and share things. But in today's world of technology, you can do it anywhere. Um, it was a complete accident, but 15 years ago, I was getting the same question 3 days in a row from three different entrepreneurs when I lived in Chicago. And I said, "You guys don't know each other? Two of the three of you used to work at the same big company, and you're literally down the street from each other." So I invited those three and half a dozen others for coffee, and it turned into 15 people that met at my office once a month. And after 6 months, the group disbanded because they were so close and they were just talking to each other offline. But um, one of the most important things is being an entrepreneur is lonely. Sometimes you can't talk to your team about some of these issues. You certainly can't talk to them about your cash pain because it'll freak some of them out about, oh, are we going to go out of business? This is all normal. It's just small company stuff. So find people you can talk to about these things. And other entrepreneurs in the same space selling to similar customers. you'll learn a lot from each other. And if nothing else, you get somebody you can cry together with.
Well, and I think it's an excellent idea, suggestion. And of course, the Naturally networks try to play that role in various communities across the country. Look, I want to flip Andy's last comment around, and I'll also say that you know, if there's no further questions after this, we'll just wrap early and give people back some time. You know, in my dark days that I was talking to you about earlier, uh, I I gotta say I wasn't fooling anybody. None. I wasn't fooling my employees. I certainly wasn't fooling my spouse. Uh, there is some benefit to being not not doom and gloom, but being candid and direct. Because a lot of the ideas that Andy was sharing, I'm talking about with your peeps. Yes, a peer group is really important because there is a certain loneliness, but you know, with your employees, your colleagues, you're all in it together. And, you know, they're going to know if you're under stress no matter what. And they also are the ones closest to a lot of those little things that can really add up on the cash flow. You know, maybe you have a company contest with some kind of award for the best cash uh, idea or profitability idea. But you know, you'd be surprised. Back to my spreadsheet, you saw all those rows. You know, every one of those rows can contribute a little here, a little there, starts to add up to real money. And involving and asking the people who are close to it, how the money goes out, how quickly to get it back in, can be fruitful, it can be bonding, and it can be profitable. Any no other questions are coming in, Andy? Any other closing summary comments from you?
Don't underestimate the magnitude of the optimism. It's what makes you as entrepreneurs brilliant, and it's also often the Achilles heel. So Gary's been there, I've been there. You know, the naivete of, well, of course I'm going to get paid on Tuesday. They said they would. Yeah, well, they said a lot of things. So, um, you know, take everything with a grain of salt and have extra money under the pillow.
And I'll end with that very can't use it too much slogan. If you don't ask, you don't get. Everything is negotiable. Everyone needs help. Your suppliers, your retailers, your customers, your wholesalers, everybody needs help. What can you do together?
Yeah.
Andy, thank you for, as usual, for your creativity, your wisdom, and your generosity of your time. Carlene and Jess just put our upcoming schedule there, and Carlene earlier in the chat put the link for this recording, which you'll be able to get tomorrow. And I hope this has been valuable. As ever, I want to say we exist to serve. So if you have topics you'd like to cover, or if you'd like have questions you'd like us to go deeper with, please let us know. This is our attempt to give back and help, and but we want this to be something that works for you. So again, thanks to my colleague Andy and to all of you, and enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Take care, Andy.